Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Welborn, and this is Faith Baptist Church Sunday School. We will be meeting in person tomorrow at 9:45, so please join us. We are going to be studying 1 Kings chapter 19. We are wrapping up our study in Kings, and next week we are going to be getting into a different study. But we have been looking at Elijah and how he had basically been serving God through all these difficulties. You had the northern kingdom of Israel, you had the southern kingdom of Judah. The northern kingdom had followed poor leadership, Ahab and Jezebel, and had followed Baal, false gods. Elijah had said there's going to be a drought on this land for 3 years, and God allowed a drought to happen to punish the nation of Israel. And Elijah then went towards Phoenicia, which is where Jezebel was from, and there was a widow there, and the widow did not run out of grain and oil because she gave Elijah some of the first of her bread that she baked. Then later on, the widow's son died. Elijah was able to bring back the son to life through the power of God. He prayed to God. He was frustrated, and he prayed, and God allowed the son to be brought back to life. Elijah then went back to Israel and challenged the prophets of Baal. There was around 450 of them. They had a standoff where they had wood with slaughtered oxen on it, basically beef on top of wood and some meat, and they were going to say, your God, bring down fire, and we will worship that God. And so whoever's God, so it was between Baal and the true God, the Hebrews call God Yahweh. So Elijah said, not only that, put water on that wood, and let's see what will happen if your Baal, your God will do. I'm looking over there like Baal's over there. But anyway, you get the point. So there was a standoff. Nothing happened with Baal's prophets. The wood sat there. The meat sat there. Elijah called out to God. Fire came down, consumed the wet wood. If you've ever tried to burn a bonfire with water on it or that's been rained on, it is difficult. So the fire from God consumed the wood and also the sacrifice. They worshipped Yahweh at that moment and put to death the prophets of Baal, 450 of them. Then Jezebel got angry and said, I'm going to come after you, Elijah. You're going to end up just like those prophets of Baal. Elijah got depressed, fled. He looked for shelter. He said, I'm the only one left. God said, no, there's around 7,000 that are believing. I want you to do this. I want you to anoint a successor, Elisha. I want you to then also anoint a new king, Jehu, for Israel. And so God gave Elijah instructions, and Elijah said, okay, I will follow these instructions. If you've ever noticed, anytime you're in just a depressed mood, if you can do something, it really helps. All I can think of is a Charlie Brown Christmas, whenever Charlie Brown is depressed and Lucy said, you need involvement. And so Charlie Brown, that was part of his getting out of depression. God said to Elijah, you need involvement. Here's some things you need to do. You're not the only one. So we are here. We are at the moment in 1 Kings chapter 19 where he anoints Elisha as successor. So people have gotten confused many years. You've heard people say Elijah, Elisha. They'll kind of blur it together. So they're two separate people. Elijah was first, and then he anointed Elisha. You don't hear the name Elisha as much as Elijah. 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 19 through 21, Elijah left there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. Shaphat was his dad. And he was plowing. 12 teams of oxen were in front of him. 12 teams is a huge amount of oxen. And he was left with the 12th team. Elijah walked by him and threw down his mantle over him. His mantle, we talked about last week, was not part of a fireplace. It was actually like an outer cloak. And so it was almost like a cape in a sense. It was an outer cape. And so he put that over him. Elisha left the oxen and followed Elijah and said, please let me kiss my father and mother, and I will follow you. Go back, he replied, for what have I done to you? So he turned back and followed him and took the team of oxen, slaughtered them, and with the oxen's wooden yoke and plow, he cooked the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. And then he left and followed Elijah and served him. It's interesting. 12 oxen means they had a lot of land. They needed instead of horsepower, a lot of oxen power to plow. So you had this situation where I'm sure there was a lot more. It wasn't like Elijah just walked up to Elisha, put his cape on him. Elisha was like, okay. There was a lot more. They probably knew each other. Elisha had seen Elijah, and there had been a calling to Elisha to follow God's plan. He probably was going to inherit his father's farm, and there was going to be a lot of wealth. Instead, he decided to follow God and learn under Elijah. So, when you read the Bible, I'm sure there's a lot more that happened in this scene than just this. And he went back and killed the oxen and cut up the plow and used the parts of the plow, the wooden parts, to have a burnt sacrifice. I'm sure it smelled really good. It was like one of the biggest barbecues ever. Can you imagine 12 oxen? So, interesting. Elisha, Elijah, they meet. And again, I'm sure they knew each other. There was some context to the relationship there. He was, from what we understand, Elisha was probably from the area of Israel in the northern kingdom. And so he had seen the prophets of Baal and had felt uncomfortable and had been prepared. If you know anybody that's had a calling, God had been or has been with people preparing their hearts for quite a while. And succession plans are interesting. I had a conversation with the marching band director. I'm with the leadership team in the marching band. Joseph's going to graduate this year. He's a senior, and so next year I will rotate out of leadership, and so there will be new people to come in, and that's just the way marching band programs have worked. If you've known anything, even sports programs with boosters and so forth, parent involvement has been like that. Kids graduate, new parents come on board. Instead of just having somebody come on board and not know what's happening, I'm going to work with the parent, whoever will come into the leadership role, and the other parents will too, and say, hey, this is how things are done, so that there's not a shock whenever they get started. With churches and things like that, we are just one generation away from major change. We are just one generation away from either getting closer to God or getting much farther away from God. And so however we bring up the next generation and train them, it's on us to do that. And so that's what Elijah was doing with Elisha. We assume he was probably young. He was out there plowing and working, and so could have been a teenager. In 2 Kings, we'll move forward to 2 Kings chapter 2. Elisha said to him, this is verse 6, stay here, the Lord is sending me to Jordan. But Elisha said, as the Lord lives and you live as you live, I will not leave you. So the two of them went on. 50 men from the sons of the prophets came and stood observing them in the distance, while the two of them stood by the Jordan. Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up. This is one of the partings of the water that you don't hear about much in the Bible. So he took up his robe, basically his mantle, struck the water with it, and it parted from the right and the left. So he parted the river Jordan. And then the two of them crossed over the dry ground, similar to what happened with the Red Sea when it was parted. The ground was dry. God worked a miracle to make that ground dry enough to walk on. If you ever walked on any kind of river bottom or lake bottom or anything, it's mushy. So again, a miracle with that. And when they crossed over, tell me what I can do for you before I take from here. And Elisha answered, please let me inherit 2 shares of your spirit, a double blessing. And Elijah replied, you have asked for something difficult. If you see me being taken from you, you will have it. If not, you won't. So it's interesting how that's kind of conditional in a sense. And as they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire with horses of fire suddenly appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up into heaven in a whirlwind. Elijah did not experience physical death here on earth. Enoch was also one of the other, I hope I'm getting this right now, I'm saying this on the fly. So anyway, there's another in the Old Testament that did not see physical death. He was transported to heaven. There's a theory that Elijah is going to be one of the 2 prophets that's going to be mentioned in Revelation. We're not sure who the 2 are, but that's a theory, since he did not see physical death here on earth, that God is saving him for the future in Revelation. So Elisha sees this, and again, you imagine walking out in a field or near a river, and this fiery chariot comes down and swoops away and takes away somebody that's been with you. And so Elisha then continues on, and it's a miraculous thing that happens. He requested that double portion of the Spirit, and the Bible basically attributed twice as many miracles with Elisha as he did Elijah. So it's interesting to see how God worked in that. And again, you don't hear about Elisha as much as Elijah. 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 12 through 14. As Elisha watched and kept crying out, my father and my mother, the chariots and the horsemen of Israel. When he could see him no longer, he took hold of his own clothes and tore them in two. picked up the mantle that had fallen off Elijah and went back to and stood on the bank of the Jordan. And he took the mantle Elijah had dropped and struck the water where the Lord God, where is the Lord God of Elijah, he asked. And he struck the water himself, and it parted to the right and the left, and Elijah crossed over. So you see the beginning of Elisha's ministry and that first miracle that Elisha does. And you hear people in the Old Testament tore their clothing in two. It's not like just, and they're multi-layers of clothing that they wore. And so outer garment tearing was what happened. It was a visible sign of lament or sorrow. And so here was this great person that he wanted to follow, and then God took him away. And now he was the one in taking on the mantle, or basically the baton, in the sense of telling others about God. And so it's pretty cool. Elijah, that's the lesson. Hopefully we'll see everybody tomorrow in person. If not, if you're watching this at home, lots of love and prayers. Be safe, and we will meet again next week. Thanks.